Speaker of the House of Commons, that's Sir Lindsay Hall. He's going to make a statement later this afternoon after pressure to designate China as a national security threat.
So this comes after a parliamentary researcher was arrested on suspicion of spying for Beijing.
The that spy, so-called spy, has been named by one national newspaper. I suspect now they may be named in the House of Commons. So Nigel Farage, our very own, joins us this morning. Nigel, it's being described as one of the biggest escalations here of a hostile state having a spy right in the heart of Parliament with connections to two very, very senior Conservative MPs.
Yeah, and the funny thing is we've all forgotten about the Barry Gardner case, haven't we? That was only 18 months ago when a woman closely linked to the Chinese Communist Party had given Barry Gardner's office, not him personally, but his political campaigns and office expenses, hundreds of thousands of pounds. We forget about it, we move on. There's another scandal, we'll probably forget about it and move on. And Andrew, I conclude there are just too many people in senior positions in our country who see long-term their own personal benefit out of our relationship with China. And you only have to look at the list of people who've been non-executive directors of the Huawei Communications Group to understand what I mean.
And was it, was it a mistake, therefore, Nigel, for the Foreign Secretary, bearing in mind that when Rishi Sunak got into number 10, he said there'd be no more rolling out the red carpet to the Chinese? That's what he said. They're the biggest threat to our security and our economy. Was it a mistake for, cleverly, the Foreign Secretary to go to China a couple of weeks ago, effectively laying out the red carpet to the Chinese?
Well, the extraordinary thing is we learned from this story that the arrest took place back in March.
Yeah.
Now, it seems to me to be impossible that the Foreign Secretary didn't know that information.
Right.
And in the light of that, I'm very, very surprised that he went.
I don't know about you, Nigel, but I spend a lot more time being terrified of our own leaders in this country than I do of the Chinese Communist Party. Can I just bring up this tweet from Rishi Sunak when he went to G20 last week? And this is what he actually tweeted, and it says, two nations, one ambition. We're just waiting for the graphic to come up. Sorry about this. An ambition rooted in our shared values, the connection between our people, and of course, there it is, our passion for cricket. This is with Modi in India. One Earth, one family, one future, it says behind the image. Now, this tweet for me raises more questions than it answers. What did you make of it? I'd like an explanation of what that ambition is to start with.
Well, Rishi Sunak is a globalist. I mean, let's be clear. He's said to be a Brexiteer, but that's just because the farming vote, the small farmers, the livestock farmers in North Yorkshire, if he hadn't said he was going to back Brexit, would probably have had him deselected. He's a globalist, and all the evidence is there for all to see. And this shared ambition appears to be not just one of closer relationships between our two countries, but that everything should be done on a grand global scale. And that's why at G7 and G20, Sunak is welcomed with open arms by all of the world's leaders.
Now, they would say, why is that a problem? So why is it a problem to be a globalist? Why does that matter when maybe you could argue that some of our problems need solving with collaboration?
Oh, there's a huge difference, Bev, between collaboration, which is where nations work together on joint issues, and perhaps NATO is a rather good example of how we've done that for the last 70 plus years. A big difference between that and transferring decision-making powers to a higher authority. That is ultimately why we voted Brexit. We wanted to be in control of our own laws and our own borders. And perhaps Rishi Sunak ought to remember that. And, you know, you've got other organisations too, like the World Health Organization, seeking to, give itself powers where it could start to tell us what to do the next time we have a pandemic. Globalism is about taking away the individual voter's right to change their own future. And that's why I find it so repellent.
Yeah.
You mentioned Brexit, Nigel. I don't know if you were watching last night of the Proms on Saturday. I watched the last hour. I couldn't bear it. My partner had to leave the room to see quite so many EU flags being waved. And we know it was all a stunt, done with the connivance of the BBC, of course, because they were being handed out by an EU organisation beforehand. We then had to put up with a 6-minute speech by the very irritating American conductor who was going on about the United Nations and diversity. It's not the right time or place, is it, for all this EU bile and politics last night of the Proms?
No, not at all. In fact, it was blooming rude, I thought, the whole thing. Rude, insulting, inappropriate. But I'm afraid we do have this small group of people in this country who hate the country, hate its flag, hate its history, hate its shared commonality and identity. And there they were in the hall. Mercifully, they are but a small minority. I know they're having a rejoin march in London in a couple of weeks' time. I think the best thing we can do, Andrew, that was difficult on Saturday, I agree. I was rather like you. I had to leave the room. But the best thing we can do, frankly, is to ignore as much as possible.
Yeah.
I think that's probably right. It was just very difficult. Nigel, what of that? I mean, do you detect any... You talk, there is this march, rejoin the EU. I get messages all the time from the European movement saying the campaign isn't over. Michael Heseltine is still banging on about it. There are various people in the Labour Party who want it to happen. Is it ever going to happen? Boris Johnson wrote in my paper on Saturday, it will never, ever happen.
No, I don't think Brexit itself legally is going to be reversed. That's not the problem. The problem is, whilst we may be standing taller on the world stage as an independent country, and that's beyond doubt, you know, whether it's the AUKUS deal or whether it's taking leadership over Ukraine or whatever it may be, the problem is domestically, people who voted Brexit are not seeing any of the results they expected. And, you know, one of the reasons that we voted Brexit, we saw what was happening in the Mediterranean. And we said, these people have made such a mess of this, we want nothing to do with it. And yet, we've got our own version of the Mediterranean that's happened. So that's one reason why people are disappointed. And the other, you know, there are millions of people out there, men and women, doing their absolute best to run their little businesses, to act as sole traders. And they genuinely thought that the heavy hand of bureaucracy and taxation would be lighter outside of the EU. And unfortunately, under this government, in nearly all regards, it's become heavier. So there is great disappointment about the execution of Brexit. And I think, for me particularly, an understanding that the Conservative Party never believed in it. I mean, if I hadn't forced them into it in those European elections of 2019, you know, I wonder whether the Damien Greens and others would have been pushing for a second referendum then. So the failure to deliver is not the same, though, as the desire to rejoin and to sign a new treaty would commit us above all to joining the euro. That isn't going to happen. But I have to say, like many millions of others, I'm extremely disappointed with the way in which it's been delivered.
OK, thank you, Nigel. Nigel Farage there. Of course, you can see him on GB News tonight at 7 p.m. Now